Welcome back, guys. This is part 3 of the APES Chapter 14 lecture. We've got just a couple of slides to crack through here. Um, Essentially, the end of this chapter is what can we do to be better? How can we improve our cities? We left off talking about preserving the surrounding land. We talked about preserving green spaces, things like parks, things like just open green areas, things like we have here at school where we have a small forest that surrounds waterways. Those are all really good ways to make the city greener, make the city more sustainable. We're encouraging more photosynthesis. We're removing carbon dioxide right where it's being released, and all those types of things. So it's about finding ways to make our cities model ecological communities. So we could also retrofit, existing cities by gearing the city towards the people, not the vehicles. Many of our cities are designed around the streets and trying to figure out how we're going to drive around. One of the things I was most surprised about when I visited Rome was the fact that it wasn't that way. The cars are an afterthought. Rome is such an ancient city that the city definitely wasn't planned with cars in mind. They had to figure out how to squeeze cars into these tiny little alleys that were also sidewalks, and these areas that were designed to be for people, we had to cram cars into. So traffic was a nightmare there. But we could develop low polluting mass transit systems. We could use those really high efficiency buses that I mentioned in the last video. There are some really clean versions of trains and rails, and there are electric rails and things along those lines that can be clean if they're powered by solar or something along those lines. We can meet high energy efficiency standards for electricity and appliances. We can essentially continue to encourage high efficiency appliances. We can really set high standards for how we're going to generate our electricity. That kind of piggybacks with that next point that talks about making use of renewable energy resources. That's really important in cities. We can do things like have green roofs. I mean, plant trees and plants throughout the city. We've talked a little bit about green roofs this year, but if you put plants and especially soil on top of a building, number one, you can grow produce that the people in that building can consume. Number two, you're insulating the building really, really, really well, so you don't lose as much heat or you don't lose as much air conditioning through the roof. You're using that soil and those plants as a natural insulator. Now, of course, your building has to be strong enough to support that added weight, but if you're planning for that, then you can make that a part of things. Kind of more extreme measures would be like using solar roadways and street lights that have solar panels. And I guess that's not really an extreme measure, but there are lots of things like that we could do to make our cities much more environmentally friendly. Reduce noise and air pollution. That's air pollution, I think, is an easier one to knock out than noise pollution. Often, if we plant trees in areas that have lots of noise, we can drown out or silence some of that noise. If we surround a big noisy factory or we surround train tracks or things like that with trees, they'll provide a natural insulator for noise pollution. Of course, we always want to limit soil erosion. And then we want to use really smart land use planning. We can do multi-use zoning as opposed to traditional zoning. There's one building in Indianapolis that I drive past often that makes me think about this. It's called the Ironworks building, and there's an Ironworks gym in there, and there's a Ruth's Chris Steakhouse in there, and there are apartments in this building, and there's a small convenience store that's like a grocery store kind of a thing. So for those folks to get basic groceries, they don't have to get in their car. They just go downstairs. You guys will really live some of this stuff when you're a college student. Often college students can't have a car on campus, so you walk everywhere. Since you don't have a car, you don't drive to Kroger. You go to what they call a C-store in Bloomington. It's a convenience store. It's in one of the dorms. You walk to where you need to be. You buy the food you need. You walk back. So multi-use zoning is really taken off. It's a smart growth pattern that really lets us reduce sprawl and lets us maximize our land use. Let's grow vertically instead of horizontally. A couple of other things. Eco-cities would be something that's eco-friendly. Clean up industrial sites, preserve nearby forests, source food locally from nearby farms, solar greenhouses, rooftop gardens I talked about a little bit. Um, More and more it appears, and I know we've talked about this in when we looked at agriculture, but sourcing food locally is so important. If we can get our food to travel fewer miles on the truck, we're reducing so much carbon dioxide. We're supporting our local economy. We're growing food locally. We're able to do that sustainably, and it lowers the cost of food. Now, in all places, that's not practical today, but if we introduce some of those alternative farming strategies like vertical farming and like urban farming and aquaponics and hydroponics and all those types of things that we talked about, it's possible. It's not impossible for this stuff to happen. These things are already a reality in a lot of the cities, major cities in the world. Portland does a lot with urban growth boundaries and containing sprawl. And Bogota, Colombia has done some great things with mass transit. And there just are really great examples around the world for us to follow. Some of them right here at home in the U.S. Denver's another example of a city that does a lot with smart growth. So there are things that we can do and things that we really should do when we start looking at communities as small as Crawfordsville or as large as something like Indianapolis. My small town is installing a solar park starting this spring, and our whole town will be powered by solar energy. So that's one small way that my small town is able to reduce our environmental impact. It's not going to affect our electric prices, so we hear. It's not going to make it any cheaper, but in terms of the grand scheme of things, it's cheaper for the planet. We're going to be responsible for a lot less carbon dioxide and nitrates and sulfates and all those things that coal-fired electric plants release. So there are really small things that we can do in small places, and there are a bunch of really small things that we can do in big places to really make a big difference. If such a high percentage of our people are going to live in cities, let's find a way to make our cities sustainable, or at least more sustainable than they are now. I mentioned this smart growth term a few minutes ago. Smart growth is going to include zoning laws and regulations to direct growth. Again, multi-use zoning means build a grocery store, a gym, a restaurant, and apartments all in the same building. Be efficient with your space. Some zoning, traditional zoning, says, okay, this is an industry, like an industrial area. This is a commercial area. This is a residential area. We don't have zoning here in Montgomery County, so you can build whatever you want, wherever you want. Well, that means you can build whatever you want, wherever you want. You can scatter buildings wherever you want. If that's not the case, then that allows you to control your growth patterns so much more. Basically, the definition of smart growth is right here. Policies and tools that encourage more environmentally sustainable urban development. And again, it's just basically trying to be better, trying to find ways to make our cities more sustainable. So that's the end of 14.